Michael Jordan had just conquered the world, but one sentence inside a private club would shatter everything. The summer of 1991 shimmered with the kind of magic that only legends create. After years of relentless pursuit, heartbreak, and near misses, Michael Jordan had finally scaled the mountain and planted his flag. The Chicago Bulls were champions. The trophy was his. The dynasty had begun. For millions watching, his teary embrace of the Larry O'Brien Championship Trophy wasn't just a sports moment. It was a cultural one. It symbolized the triumph of grit, the reward of sacrifice, the proof that hard work could turn dreams into reality. On the streets of Chicago, murals of Jordan sprouted overnight. In playgrounds across America, kids wore baggy red jerseys with a bold 23 stitched across their backs. Commercials, magazine covers, late-night shows. Jordan was everywhere. He wasn't just a basketball player anymore. He was the face of excellence. He was proof that greatness, once doubted, could silence every critic. Weeks later, the glow of victory hadn't dimmed. Jordan's calendar overflowed with interviews, endorsements, and celebrations. But behind the fame, behind the blinding flash of cameras, he was still a man seeking moments of quiet escape. And for Michael, one of those escapes had always been golf. The rhythm of the swing, the calm of the course, the patience of the game, it balanced the chaos of the hardwood. So when Charles Oakley suggested a round at Winged Foot Golf Club in Mamaroneck, New York, Michael agreed. Oakley was his brother, in arms, his enforcer on the court, the man who always had his back. A golf outing with Oak was supposed to be pure relaxation, a small slice of peace after the storm of a championship season. The Mercedes hummed as it wound up the pristine driveway. Winged Foot wasn't just any club, it was one of the most prestigious golf sanctuaries in America. Generations of powerful men had walked those greens. Politicians, CEOs, Wall Street giants, the kind of men who shaped laws and markets over a quiet round. To Michael, stepping onto those grounds was another symbol of arrival. A silent nod from the elite. "You belong here now." Oakley whistled low as they pulled up. "Man, Mike, look at this place. Even the grass looks rich." Michael laughed, swinging his clubs out of the trunk. "Jerry said he'd meet us inside. Should be fun." Jerry Reinsdorf, the Bulls' owner, had extended the invitation himself. That mattered. Reinsdorf wasn't just an owner. He was a man with access to doors most people never even saw. For him to say, "Come play at Winged Foot," was a signal. Michael wasn't just his employee. He was a peer. The clubhouse loomed ahead, all brick grandeur and white columns. The massive wooden doors glowed in the sunlight, golden handles polished to a mirror shine. Oakley muttered, "This joint makes the White House look small." Inside, the world shifted. High ceilings framed with gold trim, leather chairs, marble, floors polished until they reflected the chandeliers above. The scent of cigars mixed with oak-paneled walls. Portraits of old men in tuxedos stared down from every angle, their painted eyes following newcomers like silent judges. It was a kingdom built on exclusivity, and every detail reminded visitors of that truth. Still, Michael felt no intimidation. He was Michael Jordan, NBA champion, global icon. Surely here, among these walls, his presence would be met with nods of approval. But as he approached the front desk, the atmosphere sharpened. Behind it stood a man whose posture alone announced authority. Tall, lean, hair graying at the edges, suit pressed without a wrinkle. His name tag read, William Hartwell, club manager. His expression didn't soften when he saw Michael. In fact, it seemed to harden. Michael greeted him warmly. "Good afternoon. I'm Michael Jordan. Jerry Reinsdorf is expecting us." For a moment, Hartwell's eyes scanned him. Not with recognition, not with respect, but with something colder. Something that measured, judged, and dismissed all at once. Then, in a voice crisp as winter air, he spoke words that sliced through the room. "I'm sorry. We don't allow your kind here." The sound didn't just hit Michael. It hit the entire room. Newspapers lowered. Conversations froze. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to vanish. Dozens of powerful eyes turned toward the desk, pretending not to listen, but hanging on every syllable. Oakley stiffened instantly. His fists clenched. His voice rose. "What did you just say?" Hartwell didn't blink. "This is a private club. Membership is selective. I'm sure you understand." Michael's chest tightened. In that instant, memories collided with reality. Weeks ago, he had stood atop the world, tears falling into a golden trophy. Now, in the marble halls of privilege, he was reduced to something small, something less. His father's words, whispered years earlier, echoed faintly. "Some doors, son, won't open for us, no matter how good you are." "I was invited," Michael said, his voice steady. Mr. Reinsdorf extended the invitation himself. Hartwell's lips curled faintly. "Then Mr. Reinsdorf should have consulted us first. There has been a mistake." Oakley stepped forward, fury burning in his eyes. "Mistake? You know who this man is? He just won the NBA championship. He's the greatest player alive." But Hartwell's gaze didn't waver. "I know exactly who he is, and it doesn't change anything." Silence pressed down on Michael's shoulders. The humiliation cut deeper than any insult hurled at him on a basketball court. This wasn't about ability. It wasn't about merit. It was about something he couldn't dribble past, couldn't dunk over, couldn't outwork. And the sting wasn't just for him. It was for every story his parents had told, every barrier his people had faced. Michael reached into his pocket slowly. The brick-sized cell phone, one of his luxuries of success, felt heavy in his hand. He dialed a number, voice low enough for only Oakley to hear. "It happened again," he murmured. "But this time, we're not letting it slide. Find everything. I want to know every secret this place has ever kept." He slipped the phone away, turning back to Hartwell with a calm that felt colder than anger. "Thank you for your time. You've been very helpful." Confusion flickered across the manager's face, but Michael didn't wait for a reply. He nodded at Oakley, and together they walked out, every pair of eyes in the room following them. At the door, Michael paused. "Mr. Hartwell," he said without turning, his voice sharp. "You know what I've learned about winning championships? Sometimes the best victory comes from patience. I'm very good at waiting." The sunlight outside was warm, but to Michael it felt harsh, almost mocking. For the first time since winning the title, he didn't feel like he was soaring. He felt grounded, heavy, humiliated. And yet, deep beneath the pain, something else smoldered. A spark, a fire, the quiet promise of a storm that was coming. And, as he walked out of those gates, another memory came rushing back. A warning his father had given him years earlier. The car ride away from Winged Foot was silent. Oakley fumed beside him, muttering curses under his breath, replaying the insult again and again. Michael, though, said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the road, but his mind was somewhere else. Back. In North Carolina, decades earlier, walking hand in hand with his father on a warm summer evening. James Jordan had always carried himself with a quiet dignity. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful in the worldly sense. But he possessed a kind of strength that couldn't be measured in dollars or trophies. To young Michael, his father was the anchor of the family, the voice of reason, the man whose words carried the weight of truth. That day, as the sun dipped low and fireflies began to blink in the distance, James walked with his son past a country club with tall iron gates. Michael had stopped to peer through the bars. Inside, he saw manicured lawns, men in crisp white, shirts swinging clubs, cars gleaming in the lot. To a boy who loved competition, it looked like another world waiting to be conquered. His small fingers tightened around the basketball he carried everywhere. "Daddy," he asked, "why can't we go in there?" James paused, gazing at the gates as if he had been asked that question many times before. He crouched down to his son's level. "Son, some places weren't built for us," he said gently. "No matter how hard we work, no matter how good we get, there are doors that stay locked." Michael frowned. "But if I'm the best, won't they let me in?" James smiled sadly. Being the best changes a lot of things, but not everything. Some people don't care how high you can jump or how many shots you make. They only see what they want to see, and sometimes they'll slam the door right in your face. The boy looked down at his basketball, hurt flashing in his eyes. James placed a hand on his shoulder. But listen to me. Closed doors aren't the end. They're a challenge. And you, Michael, were born to meet challenges. Don't waste your energy pounding on a locked door. Build your own, and make it so big and so open that everyone will want to walk through it. The words had lodged deep in Michael's young heart. At the time, they sounded like wisdom meant for the future. But now, years later, as he drove away from Winged Foot, they weren't just wisdom. They were prophecy. His father had warned him. And here it was again, the locked door, the rejection, the cold reminder that no matter how high he soared, someone would always try to clip his wings. That night, Michael sat in his living room, the championship ring heavy on his finger. Juanita, his wife, watched him from across the room, worry etched on her face. "You're quiet," she said softly. Michael leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I thought it was different now. I thought winning would change everything." She moved closer, resting her hand on his arm. "You've changed everything for the world, Michael. But not everyone wants to change with it." Her words were tender, but they stung. He had dreamed that victory would erase barriers, that excellence would silence doubt. Instead, the higher he climbed, the more obvious those barriers became. And tonight, the memory of his father's lesson played in his mind like a haunting refrain. Sleep came late, and when it did, it was filled with flashes. His father's voice, the clanging of locked gates, the cold stare of William Hartwell. By morning, the sting hadn't faded. It had deepened, hardening into something else: determination. Later that week, Michael found himself back in Wilmington, sitting with his parents on the porch of their modest home. The air smelled of cut grass and magnolias. James rocked slowly in his chair, his eyes sharp despite the years that had weathered his face. He could sense the storm inside his son before Michael even spoke. "Daddy," Michael began quietly, "you remember what you told me when we passed the country club? About closed doors?" James nodded slowly. "I do." "Well," Michael said, his voice thick, "I walked through one of those doors this week, and they slammed it in my face. Right there. Didn't matter who I was. Didn't matter what I'd done." His father's jaw tightened. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the creak of the rocking chair. Then James said, "And how did it feel?" Michael clenched his fists. "Like I was 12 years old again. Like I was standing at those gates, asking you, why?" James sighed. "That's the thing about history, son. It doesn't just disappear. It waits. And sometimes it shows up to remind you how far you've come, and how far you still have to go." Michael leaned forward, eyes burning. "I can't just let it go. Not this time." His father studied him carefully. "Then don't. But remember, anger will burn you up if you let it. Use it to build. Use it to fight smart. Use it to open doors for others, not just yourself." The words sank deep, just as they had all those years ago. Michael realized then that this rejection wasn't an isolated wound. It was a link in a chain stretching back generations. The insult at Winged Foot wasn't just about him, it was about every father who had been denied, every family that had been erased, every name forgotten in the ledgers of history. As the sun set over Wilmington, Michael made a silent vow. He would not just swing harder at a locked door. He would not just prove he belonged. He would expose the locks, the gatekeepers, the entire system that thrived on exclusion. His father's lesson would not fade into memory. It would become a mission. And as he drove away from his parents' home that night, his mind sharpened on a single thought. It was time to fight back. But not with fists, not with fury, with patience, with truth, with strategy. That childhood lesson now burned in his mind. and it shaped the phone call he was about to make. The days following the rejection at Winged Foot carried a strange weight. Michael Jordan went about his routine, training, press events, promotional appearances, but something gnawed at him. The world saw a smiling champion, a man basking in the glow of his first NBA title. But beneath the surface, his mind replayed that sentence over and over. "We don't allow your kind here." The words echoed like a cruel chant, as if daring him to respond. Charles Oakley didn't bother hiding his fury. At practice, he grumbled about it between drills. At dinner, he slammed his fists on the table. "Mike, this ain't right. They disrespected you. They disrespected us. Let me go back there. I'll show them what happens when you spit on a man's dignity." Michael listened quietly, sipping his drink, his face calm. Oakley had always been the enforcer, the one who met fire with fire. But Michael knew this wasn't the kind of fight you won with fists. "Oak," he said finally, "that's what they want. They want me to lose my temper. They want me to look like I don't belong. I'm not giving them that satisfaction." Oakley leaned forward, eyes blazing. "So what? We just let it slide. You're Michael Jordan. You just won the damn championship. If they can treat you like that, what chance does anybody else have?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Exactly. That's why we can't handle it with fists. This isn't about one door closing. It's about who's holding the keys. And I want to know everything about them." That night, in the quiet of his study, Michael sat across from his wife, Juanita. The kids were asleep upstairs, their laughter still lingering faintly in the house. Juanita had seen this side of Michael before, the calm intensity, the way his eyes sharpened when a new battle formed in his mind. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the championship ring on his finger. "I keep hearing my dad's voice. He told me not to waste my time on locked doors, to build my own. But I can't ignore this one, Juanita. Not after everything we've done, not after how far we've come." She reached for his hand. "So, what will you do?" Michael exhaled slowly. "I'm going to find out who they are. Every rule, every loophole, every skeleton in their closet. If they think they can erase us with a smile and a policy, then they don't know me. They don't know how patient I can be." The following morning, his plan began to take shape. His first call was to Patricia Reynolds, a sharp and fearless civil rights lawyer he had met at a charity event months earlier. Patricia had spent years fighting cases of discrimination in housing, education, and employment. She knew the law like a boxer knew his jab, precise, powerful, and relentless. "Michael," she said over the phone, her voice steady, "what happened to you isn't new. It's just louder because of who you are. If you're serious about this, I can help. But you have to understand, it won't be quick, and it won't be pretty." "I don't need quick or pretty," Michael replied. "I need the truth." The second call was to David Stern, the NBA commissioner. Stern was a man who understood power and optics better than anyone. He knew that Jordan wasn't just a player. He was the face of the league, the reason TV ratings had exploded, the man who had turned basketball into a global phenomenon. Stern listened carefully as Michael described the rejection. "This isn't just about you, Michael," Stern said gravely. "If they can shut out the most famous athlete in the world, imagine what that says to everyone else. But be careful. These places, they don't just run on golf. They run on money, endowments, political ties, business deals. You're not just stepping onto a golf course. You're stepping into a system." Michael's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Then it's time we learn how that system works." Back in Chicago, Oakley still seethed. He watched Michael on the phone, scribbling notes, making calls, his face calm but focused. "Man, I don't get you," Oakley muttered. "They insult you to your face, and you sit here like a chess player planning your next move. I'd rather flip the board over." Michael looked up, meeting his friend's fiery gaze. "That's the difference between us, Oak. You're the fist, I'm the patience, and right now, patience is the weapon we need." Oakley shook his head, but a smile tugged at his lips. You better know what you're doing, Mike. Michael did know. Or at least, he believed he did. His father's lesson was etched into his soul. Don't pound on locked doors. Build your own. But before he could build, he needed to understand. Before he could create, he needed to expose. The rejection at Winged Foot wasn't just a personal insult, it was an invitation, a dare, a challenge to dig deeper. As the days passed, Patricia began sending him reports. Loopholes in tax filings, patterns of discriminatory membership rejections, names of board members who had ties to government contracts. David Stern added his own findings. Business deals between clubs and sponsors, networks of power that stretched far beyond golf. Each page added weight to Michael's conviction. This wasn't about golf anymore. This was about history, about control, about the invisible walls that separated privilege from persistence. Late one evening, as he sat surrounded by papers, Oakley walked in and dropped into a chair. "So, what's the play?" he asked. Michael leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "The play is patience. The play is pressure. We don't kick down their door. We make the world see what's behind it. And once they see it, those walls will crumble on their own." Oakley chuckled. "You sound like you're planning a championship run." Michael's eyes glinted. "In a way, I am. But this championship won't be won on hardwood. It'll be won in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in history books." The fire in Oakley's eyes softened, replaced by respect. "All right, then. If you're leading, I'm rolling with you. Just don't expect me to stay quiet when they push back." Michael smiled faintly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." And as the night stretched on, Michael realized the rejection at Winged Foot had done more than insult him. It had awoken him. It had turned humiliation into resolve, pain into purpose. He wasn't just going to prove he belonged. He was going to prove that the system itself needed to change. But the deeper they dug, the stranger the secrets became. Michael Jordan had always been a student of patterns. On the court, he could read an opponent's weakness in the smallest twitch of a shoulder or hesitation of a dribble. Now, sitting at his mahogany desk with stacks of papers scattered before him, he studied patterns of a different kind. They weren't box scores or play diagrams. They were records, contracts, bylaws, and filings, documents that mapped the quiet empire of exclusivity. And the deeper he looked, the uglier the pattern became. Patricia Reynolds was the first to deliver ammunition. The sharp-eyed lawyer had sent him a thick folder by courier, marked confidential. Michael opened it carefully, scanning page after page of handwritten notes and photocopied documents. At first glance, they looked harmless: membership policies, legal clauses, tax codes. But Patricia's annotations told another story. Pattern of rejection based on race and religion. Denials disguised as lack of cultural fit. Systematic evasion of federal non-discrimination laws. Michael leaned back, exhaling slowly. "They built walls so high," he murmured, "you'd need a lifetime just to climb one." That evening, Patricia called to walk him through it. Her voice was steady, clinical, but each fact carried the weight of injustice. "Michael, here's how they do it. Clubs like Winged Foot are classified as private organizations. That gives them legal cover to be selective. On paper, they claim it's about culture or tradition. But behind the curtain, it's discrimination dressed in a suit and tie. They can reject anyone without explanation, and unless you catch them in writing, it's almost impossible to prove bias." Michael listened silently, jaw tightening. Patricia continued. "I've represented teachers, doctors, business owners, people who tried to join clubs like this and were turned away. They all said the same thing. We don't allow your kind. Sometimes it meant race, sometimes religion, sometimes just not being connected enough. But it was always about power." Michael rubbed his temple. "So they hide behind paperwork." "Exactly. They operate in the shadows. But shadows always leave traces. Tax filings, property transfers, board minutes. If we dig deep enough, we'll find cracks." The next morning, another voice joined the fight. David Stern called from his New York office, his tone calm but urgent. "Michael, I've been looking into Winged Foot's sponsorship deals. Do you realize how much corporate money flows through there? Millions every year. Big banks, Wall Street firms, even government contractors. These aren't just golf games. They're networking events where billion-dollar deals are sealed. That's why they guard their gates so fiercely. It's not just about golf. It's about who gets to sit at the table where real power is traded." Michael's stomach tightened. So, shutting me out wasn't about me. It was about protecting that table. Stern sighed. Exactly. To them, you're a disruptor. You don't just walk in as Michael Jordan, the champion. You walk in as a symbol of millions who were never supposed to have a seat at that table. And if you get in, the whole system shakes. The weight of those words sank in. For years, Michael had fought battles measured in points and championships. But this was different. This was a fight over history, over structures built long before he was born. The more Patricia and Stern revealed, the clearer it became. Winged Foot wasn't just one club. It was a node in a hidden network of exclusion, a quiet fortress of privilege built on invisible rules. At night, Michael sat with Juanita in the dim glow of the living room lamp, flipping through the documents. She watched him silently, sensing the heaviness pressing on his shoulders. "This isn't basketball anymore, is it?" she asked gently. Michael shook his head. "Basketball is about skill, about proving yourself on the court. But this is about something bigger. They don't care how high I jump. They don't care how many rings I win. To them, I'll never belong. And if I can't belong, what? About everyone else?" She reached over, squeezing his hand. "Then maybe this is your real fight." The words lingered in the air. For the first time, Michael felt the scope of what lay ahead. This wasn't about a single round of golf. It was about confronting an entire system that thrived on erasure. But even as the documents piled up, even as the truth took shape, something felt incomplete. There was a gap in the story, something missing, something deeper than corporate deals and legal loopholes. One evening, after hours of reading, Oakley stormed in with his usual fire. "Man, this is crazy. They've been doing this for decades, hiding behind papers, playing their little power games while folks like us get shut out?" Michael nodded quietly. "That's what it looks like." Oakley slammed a hand on the table. "So, what's the move? We file a lawsuit. We call the press. We put them on blast?" Michael shook his head. "Not yet. If we strike too soon, they'll bury us in denials. We need more than patterns. We need proof so undeniable that the whole world sees it." Oakley frowned. "And where do we find that?" Michael stared down at the folder, eyes narrowed. "Somewhere they don't expect us to look. Somewhere closer to home." The room fell silent. Patricia's notes lay open on the desk, Stern's financial reports stacked neatly beside them. They revealed the machinery of exclusion, the skeleton of a system that had survived for generations. But Michael sensed there was more. Something personal, something tied to his own bloodline. That night, sleep refused to come. He lay awake, his father's voice echoing in his memory. "Closed doors aren't the end. Build your own." He had always thought of it as metaphor, a lesson about persistence. But what if it was more than that? What if the past itself held keys to the future? Michael didn't know it yet, but answers were waiting. Not in boardrooms, not in courtrooms, but in his own family's history. Then, out of nowhere, Michael's father handed him something that changed everything. A small brass key. Michael sat in silence, the open deposit box still vivid in his mind. The brittle papers, the fading ink, the name Samuel Morrison etched into history, then torn from it. These were not just family relics. They were proof. Proof that the fight he faced at Winged Foot was part of something far larger. He was no longer just a man denied entry at a club. He was the descendant of a man whose legacy had been stolen, whose name had been erased, whose work had been buried. For years, Michael had carried battles on his shoulders alone. On the court, he thrived under pressure. He wanted the last shot, the final moment, the weight of victory. But this was different. This wasn't a game. This was history, culture, identity. And he realized with a clarity that startled him. He couldn't fight this fight alone. That night, in his Chicago home, he called Oakley and Patricia. The kitchen table became a war room, scattered with documents from Samuel Morrison's box, Patricia's legal notes, and Stern's financial reports. Oakley leaned over the table, fists clenched. "Mike, this is insane. Your great-great-granddaddy built this land, and they stole it? Then these same folks build clubs on top of it and tell you you don't belong?" Michael's voice was calm but firm. "Exactly. And that's why this isn't just about me anymore. This is about every door they've slammed shut, every voice they've silenced. We can't just sue one club. We need to make the whole world see what they've built this system on." Patricia nodded slowly. "Then we need allies, people with influence, people they can't ignore." The next weeks unfolded like a secret campaign. Michael began calling names most thought he'd never mix with outside the world of sports. Jack Nicklaus, the golf legend, who had long respected Jordan's competitive spirit. Oprah Winfrey, whose voice carried into every American home. Robert Johnson, the billionaire entrepreneur behind BET, who understood the fight for representation in boardrooms as well as anyone. One by one, they answered. And one by one, they agreed. Not because of Michael's fame, but because the story of Samuel Morrison struck a chord deeper than headlines or highlight reels. It was about legacy. It was about stolen ground and stolen voices. The first meeting was held in a quiet, private room in Chicago. No cameras, no reporters, just a group of powerful individuals leaning over maps of golf courses, lists of private clubs, and files of hidden histories. The room buzzed with tension and purpose. Oprah leaned forward, her voice steady. "Michael, you have the platform. But this isn't just your story. It's America's story. If you tell it right, if we tell it together, it won't just expose a club. It will expose a culture." Robert Johnson tapped the papers. "These clubs thrive on secrecy. They hide behind money, connections, and tradition. If we want to break them, we can't just knock on the door. We need to bring the spotlight so bright they can't stand in it." Jack Nicklaus, the lone voice from inside the golf world, cleared his throat. "I've played these courses all my life. I know the faces behind those walls. They respect me. If I stand with you, they'll feel it. But Michael, are you ready for the backlash? Because once you start this, there's no going back." Michael's eyes didn't waver. "They shut me out because of who I am. They erased Samuel Morrison because of what he stood for. If I don't fight, who will? Yes, I'm ready." The group sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of his words sinking in. Then Patricia spread out a new plan on the table. "Here's how we start. We'll organize a coordinated strike, not violent, not angry, strategic. On the same day, across the country, dozens of high-profile black leaders, celebrities, and business owners will apply for membership at these exclusive clubs, all at once. They'll have no time to prepare, no excuses to hide behind. And when the rejections pour in, we'll have proof. Proof of discrimination, proof of exclusion, proof of their system." The idea was bold. It was risky, but it was brilliant. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, the same rush he felt in the final seconds of a tight game. This wasn't just strategy. This was a full-court press. In the following days, calls were made, letters drafted, applications prepared. Quiet whispers spread through the networks of influence. Business leaders, entertainers, athletes, all willing to risk rejection to expose the truth. Each name added to the list felt like another piece of armor, another ally in the fight. Oakley watched in awe as the plan took shape. "Mike, you turned a slap in the face into a damn army." Michael smiled faintly. "This was never about me, Oak. It was about all of us. I just needed to see it." But even as the plan gained momentum, Michael knew the risks. Clubs like Winged Foot weren't just playgrounds for the wealthy. They were fortresses tied to political power and corporate empires. To challenge them wasn't just to challenge a game. It was to challenge a structure woven into the fabric of American privilege. Late one night, as he reviewed the applications stacked on his desk, Michael paused at Samuel Morrison's documents. The faded ink seemed to whisper across the years, "Build your own door." He realized that every person who applied, every rejection letter that would follow, was another swing of the hammer against those locked gates. The coordinated strike wasn't just about golf, it was about memory. It was about restoring voices, like Samuel's, proving that exclusion couldn't erase contribution, that history could not be buried forever. And as the date drew near, the anticipation grew. Michael could feel it. The tension before the tip-off, the electric quiet before the first whistle. Only this time, the court wasn't hardwood. It was history. Together, they created a plan so bold, it would shake the entire country club system to its core. The morning air felt electric, charged with a kind of tension Michael hadn't felt since stepping onto the court before a finals Game 7. Except this time, there was no scoreboard, no crowd, no ball, just envelopes. Neatly sealed, addressed to the most exclusive golf and country clubs in America. Michael sat at the head of his dining table, staring at the pile. They looked harmless enough, plain white, ordinary. But inside them was a storm. Each envelope carried the name of someone who had been told, explicitly or implicitly, "You don't belong here." Oprah, Robert Johnson, Samuel L. Jackson. Athletes, CEOs, entertainers. Dozens of people, bound together not by the love of golf, but by the determination to break down walls. Juanita poured coffee, setting the mug beside him. "You look like you're about to play overtime." Michael chuckled softly, eyes never leaving the stack. "Feels the same. Except this time the whole country is watching, even if they don't know it yet." At precisely 10 a.m., the strike began. In Chicago, Michael handed his own application across a polished counter, the receptionist's hand trembling slightly as she recognized his name. In New York, Oprah's assistant slid her application across a desk at an uptown club, the manager's smile faltering for a split second. In D.C., Robert Johnson walked into a mahogany-paneled office, placed his paperwork down, and stared the secretary in the eye until she looked away. It was synchronized, coordinated, almost militaristic. The envelopes hit desks across time zones, like dominoes falling in perfect rhythm. To the public, it was invisible. To the clubs, it was an ambush. By mid-afternoon, panic had begun to ripple. Board members whispered in urgent phone calls. Emails fired back and forth. Do we have grounds for rejection? How many minority applicants can we handle before the press notices? Should we delay responses until the heat dies down? Winged Foot, still reeling from Michael's humiliation, became ground zero. Its committee held an emergency meeting that evening, leather chairs circling a table of anxious men. One leaned forward, sweat beading on his forehead. If we let one in, the floodgates open. But if we deny all of them, it looks like what it is. What it is, another muttered bitterly, is our tradition. We don't change for anyone. Back in Chicago, Oakley slammed a fresh letter onto Michael's desk. You gotta see this one. They told Robert Johnson he didn't meet the financial requirements. The man's a billionaire, Mike. A billionaire. They think people are stupid? Michael picked up the letter, scanning the lines. The wording was polished, professional. But underneath it was the same message he'd heard at Winged Foot. We don't allow your kind. He placed it back onto the growing pile. One rejection is an excuse. Dozens? That's a pattern. And a pattern is proof. The rejections came in waves. Some hid behind bureaucracy. No openings available. Others behind culture. Not the right fit. A few didn't even bother disguising it. Oprah called, holding back laughter laced with rage. Michael, they told me I didn't meet their standard of community contribution. Me. After 30 years of giving scholarships, funding schools, and building platforms for voices they'd never listened to. Michael's jaw tightened. Good. Every lie they write down is another brick out of their wall. Patricia was relentless, tracking each response, cataloging them with precision. This is bigger than I expected, she told Michael late one night. They're not even coordinating their excuses. Some say too many applicants, others say no cultural fit, others say finances. They're contradicting themselves in writing. This isn't just exclusion, it's chaos. And chaos is evidence. The media caught the scent within days. Whispers in newsrooms turned into questions on morning shows. Why are so many celebrities applying to private clubs? Why now? Reporters sniffed around, sensing a story, but not yet, piecing it together. And still, Michael waited. Timing was everything. He wanted the stack of rejection letters to grow so tall it could not be ignored. He wanted the story to explode not as rumor, but as undeniable fact. Oakley, restless as ever, paced the room. Man, I don't know how you do it. If this was me, I'd have blown it up on the first day. Gone live on TV, called them out by name. Michael smiled faintly. That's why it's not you. If we hit them too early, they bury it. But if we wait until they've buried themselves, there's no escaping. Patience is the weapon, Oak. One evening, as Michael sorted through yet another wave of rejections, his eyes caught on a familiar phrase. Not a cultural fit. He flipped through the pile. Again and again, the same wording, the same subtle dagger wrapped in politeness. He leaned back, the irony cutting deep. Samuel Morrison hadn't been considered a fit for ownership in 1898. Nearly a century later, the language hadn't changed. It had just grown more polished. By now, the pile of letters was thick enough to fill a box. Each envelope was a scar. Each line of text was another window into a system that thrived on silence. And Michael knew silence was exactly what he was about to shatter. Because soon, those letters wouldn't just sit on his desk. They'd sit in front of cameras. They'd sit in the hands of journalists. They'd flood the airwaves and timelines. And once the world saw them all together, the fortress walls would start to crack. Michael placed the latest letter on top of the stack, his fingers lingering on it. His father's voice echoed again. Don't pound on closed doors. Build your own. But sometimes, he thought, you needed to show the world how those doors had been locked in the first place, and the lock was already breaking. And when the rejections came pouring in, the internet was ready to explode. The morning air felt electric, charged with a kind of tension Michael hadn't felt since stepping onto the court before a finals Game 7. Except this time, there was no scoreboard, no crowd, no ball, just envelopes. Neatly sealed, addressed to the most exclusive golf and country clubs in America. Michael sat at the head of his dining table, staring at the pile. They looked harmless enough, plain white, ordinary. But inside them was a storm. Each envelope carried the name of someone who had been told, explicitly or implicitly, you don't belong here. Oprah, Robert Johnson, Samuel L. Jackson. Athletes, CEOs, entertainers. Dozens of people, bound together not by the love of golf, but by the determination to break down walls. Juanita poured coffee, setting the mug beside him. You look like you're about to play overtime. Michael chuckled softly, eyes never leaving the stack. Feels the same. Except this time the whole country is watching, even if they don't know it yet. At precisely 10 a.m., the strike began. In Chicago, Michael handed his own application across a polished counter, the receptionist's hand trembling slightly as she recognized his name. In New York, Oprah's assistant slid her application across a desk at an uptown club, the manager's smile faltering for a split second. In D.C., Robert Johnson walked into a mahogany-paneled office, placed his paperwork down, and stared the secretary in the eye until she looked away. It was synchronized, coordinated, almost militaristic. The envelopes hit desks across time zones, like dominoes falling in perfect rhythm. To the public, it was invisible. To the clubs, it was an ambush. By mid-afternoon, panic had begun to ripple. Board members whispered in urgent phone calls. Emails fired back and forth. Do we have grounds for rejection? How many minority applicants can we handle before the press notices? Should we delay responses until the heat dies down? Winged Foot, still reeling from Michael's humiliation, became ground zero. Its committee held an emergency meeting that evening, leather chairs circling a table of anxious men. One leaned forward, sweat beading on his forehead. If we let one in, the floodgates open. But if we deny all of them, it looks like what it is. What it is, another muttered bitterly, is our tradition. We don't change for anyone. Back in Chicago, Oakley slammed a fresh letter onto Michael's desk. You gotta see this one. They told Robert Johnson he didn't meet the financial requirements. The man's a billionaire, Mike. A billionaire. They think people are stupid? Michael picked up the letter, scanning the lines. The wording was polished, professional. But underneath it was the same message he'd heard at Winged Foot. We don't allow your kind. He placed it back onto the growing pile. One rejection is an excuse. Dozens? That's a pattern. And a pattern is proof. The rejections came in waves. Some hid behind bureaucracy. No openings available. Others behind culture. Not the right fit. A few didn't even bother disguising it. Oprah called, holding back laughter laced with rage. Michael, they told me I didn't meet their standard of community contribution. Me. After 30 years of giving scholarships, funding schools, and building platforms for voices they'd never listened to, Michael's jaw tightened. Good. Every lie they write down is another brick out of their wall. Patricia was relentless, tracking each response, cataloging them with precision. This is bigger than I expected, she told Michael late one night. They're not even coordinating their excuses. Some say too many applicants, others say no cultural fit, others say finances. They're contradicting themselves in writing. This isn't just exclusion, it's chaos. And chaos is evidence. The media caught the scent within days. Whispers in newsrooms turned into questions on morning shows. Why are so many celebrities applying to private clubs? Why now? Reporters sniffed around, sensing a story, but not yet, piecing it together. And still, Michael waited. Timing was everything. He wanted the stack of rejection letters to grow so tall it could not be ignored. He wanted the story to explode not as rumor, but as undeniable fact. Oakley, restless as ever, paced the room. Man, I don't know how you do it. If this was me, I'd have blown it up on the first day. Gone live on TV, called them out by name. Michael smiled faintly. That's why it's not you. If we hit them too early, they bury it. But if we wait until they've buried themselves, there's no escaping. Patience is the weapon, Oak. One evening, as Michael sorted through yet another wave of rejections, his eyes caught on a familiar phrase. Not a cultural fit. He flipped through the pile. Again and again, the same wording, the same subtle dagger wrapped in politeness. He leaned back, the irony cutting deep. Samuel Morrison hadn't been considered a fit for ownership in 1898. Nearly a century later, the language hadn't changed. It had just grown more polished. By now, the pile of letters was thick enough to fill a box. Each envelope was a scar. Each line of text was another window into a system that thrived on silence. And Michael knew silence was exactly what he was about to shatter. Because soon, those letters wouldn't just sit on his desk. They'd sit in front of cameras. They'd sit in the hands of journalists. They'd flood the airwaves and timelines. And once the world saw them all together, the fortress walls would start to crack. Michael placed the latest letter on top of the stack, his fingers lingering on it. His father's voice echoed again. Don't pound on closed doors. Build your own. But sometimes, he thought, you needed to show the world how those doors had been locked in the first place, and the lock was already breaking. And when the rejections came pouring in, the internet was ready to explode. The rejection letters had piled high, their polite language hiding the sharp edge of exclusion. The world was beginning to whisper, journalists sniffing at the story like hounds circling a trail. Michael knew the dam was close to breaking. But Then, something happened that none of them could have predicted. It began with a phone call. Patricia's office line rang late on a Friday evening. She almost didn't answer, thinking it was another client or a routine case. But the voice on the other end carried a quiet urgency that froze her. "My name is Margaret Chen," the woman said softly. "I sit on the membership committee at one of the oldest clubs in New York. I know what they've been doing, and I can't be silent anymore." Patricia's pulse quickened. She pressed the phone tighter to her ear. "Do you understand what you're saying? This could ruin your career. Maybe more." "I understand," Margaret whispered. "But I've seen enough. The files, the votes, the instructions from the board. It's all rigged. They tell us who to accept and who to reject. The reasons are never written down, but the bias is obvious. And with what happened to Michael Jordan, I can't keep pretending." Patricia leaned back in her chair, already knowing this was the missing piece. One rejection was suspicion. A pattern was evidence. But an insider? That was truth, spoken from within the fortress walls. 2 days later, Margaret sat nervously in a quiet Chicago cafe, sunglasses hiding her face. Across from her, Michael, Patricia, and Oakley listened as she slid a folder across the table. Oakley leaned forward, eager, but Michael raised a hand, calming the moment. "Tell us," he said gently. Margaret's voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. "Every year, we receive applications. They're supposed to be judged fairly, but the truth is, the decisions are already made before we even meet. If a name fits their idea of tradition, it's rubber-stamped. If it doesn't, well, you know the outcome. Sometimes they dress it up as finances or availability. But I've sat in those rooms, I've heard the comments. Not our kind. Doesn't fit our culture. And worse." Michael's face hardened. "You're saying it's deliberate?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, and it's not just about race. It's religion, gender, even politics. They've built a system designed to protect themselves and shut everyone else out. And it's tied to money. Corporate sponsors, government contracts, business deals made on the greens. If the wrong person gets in, the wrong eyes might see what's really happening." Patricia flipped through the folder Margaret had handed over. Inside were meeting notes, internal memos, even email printouts. One in particular made her blood run cold. "Ensure all minority applications are deferred until further notice. Do not approve without unanimous board approval." Patricia slid the page to Michael. He read it silently, his jaw clenching tighter, with every word. "Deferred," he muttered. "That's just another word for erased." Oakley slammed his fist against the table, drawing glances from other cafe patrons. "Man, they put it in writing! They actually put it in writing!" Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. "I've risked everything bringing this to you. They'll know it was me. But I can't sit in those rooms anymore, listening to them laugh about shutting people out. If this story goes public, I'll be ruined. But maybe it's worth it." Michael studied her carefully. She was nervous, fragile, but her courage was undeniable. He saw in her the same fire that had burned in Samuel Morrison, the same defiance that had carried through his family line. Quiet, but unyielding. "You're not going to be ruined," Michael said firmly. "You're going to be remembered. People like you, people willing to speak truth when it costs them everything, they change the world." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, but she nodded. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. That night, back in his study, Michael spread Margaret's documents across the table, together with the rejection letters, the financial patterns, and Samuel's history. The picture was complete. This wasn't about golf clubs anymore. This was about an empire of exclusion built on stolen land, hidden deals, and silent prejudice. Patricia's voice broke the silence. "Michael, with this, we can take them to court. We can take them to Congress. We can take them to the press. There's no defense against their own words." But Michael didn't answer right away. He stared at the old photo of Samuel Morrison, the one Dorothy had given him, and thought about the brass key. This wasn't just about tearing something down. It was about building something new. Exposing the truth was only the first step. Restoring dignity. That was the mission. Oakley paced in the corner, still buzzing with energy. "So what's next, Mike? You've got the letters, you've got the insider, you've got the proof. What's the play?" Michael finally looked up, his voice steady, calm, but laced with fire. "The play is to show the world everything. Not piece by piece, not whisper by whisper, all at once. Let them see the whole picture, every letter, every memo, every lie. And when they see it, there'll be no going back." Patricia smiled grimly. "Then we're ready." Michael leaned back in his chair, the weight of history pressing on him, but no longer suffocating him. Margaret Chen had given him the missing puzzle piece, and now the image was clear. This wasn't just a fight for entry into a club. It was a fight for memory, for justice, for the right to belong. And he knew exactly what to do with it. But what Jordan discovered next made even corruption look small, because it involved his very bloodline. The press conference was unannounced. No teasers, no hints, no PR machine whispering to the media days in advance. It was sudden, like a lightning strike on a clear day. Early that morning, a single email had gone out to every major newsroom in the country. "Michael Jordan will make a statement today at 1 p.m. at the United Center." By noon, the plaza outside the arena was swarming. Reporters, cameras, vans, satellite dishes. It looked less like a sports announcement and more like a national emergency. Michael stepped onto the stage in a dark suit, not the jersey the world was used to seeing him in. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of generations. Patricia stood to one side, Oakley to the other. Margaret Chen, veiled in a low hat, watched from the back. He adjusted the microphone. The room fell into silence. 2 months ago, Michael began, his voice steady. "I was denied entry into a private club, not because of my talent, not because of my character, but because of who I am. They said, in words they thought I'd never repeat, 'We don't allow your kind here.'" A ripple spread through the room. Pens froze mid-scribble. Cameras zoomed closer. Michael reached to his side. Patricia handed him a thick stack of papers. He raised them high. "Since then, I've received these rejection letters, dozens of them, addressed not just to me, but to some of the most accomplished, respected, and generous people in this country. Each one cloaked in polite words, but everyone carrying the same message. You don't belong." He placed the letters on the podium, with a thud. The sound echoed like a gavel. "But that's not all," he continued. He pulled another folder. This time, Margaret's documents. Internal memos, meeting notes, emails. These are their own words. Proof that discrimination isn't rumor, it's policy. Proof that they built walls not just around golf courses, but around opportunity itself. Gasps swept the room. Reporters jostled for position. Oakley folded his arms, watching them squirm. "And then," Michael said, his voice softening, "there's my family. A man named Samuel Morrison, my great-great-grandfather. A freedman, a landowner, a builder. He owned land that was taken from him, land that now holds some of these very clubs. They erased his name from history. But they didn't erase his blood, because I stand here today as his descendant, and I will not let his memory be erased again." Chunty, room exploded. Questions flew, cameras flashed. Patricia raised her hand, signaling silence, but the frenzy was unstoppable. This wasn't just a sports story anymore. This was history, colliding with the present. By evening, the footage had spread across every channel. CNN replayed the moment Michael dropped the rejection letters on the podium. ESPN cut away from playoff coverage to air his entire speech. Newspapers rushed out special editions, and online, the internet caught fire. On Twitter, Hashtags trended within minutes. Open the gates. We belong. Remember Samuel Morrison. Thousands of people began sharing their own stories of rejection, of humiliation at clubs, schools, and workplaces. Some posted pictures of letters they'd received, eerily similar to Michael's. Others posted family stories of land lost, of opportunities stolen. Instagram feeds filled with side-by-side photos. Michael lifting a trophy in one frame, Samuel Morrison's faded photograph in another. TikTok users created montages. Michael's voice overlaying images of closed gates, golf courses, and protest marches from decades past. Even younger fans, kids who had never seen Michael play a live game, felt the weight of his words. For them, this wasn't about basketball, it was about belonging. Late that night, Michael sat in his study as the news played on every channel. Oakley flipped through social media on his phone, grinning. "Mike, you broke the internet. Look at this." Samuel Morrison is trending in 20 countries. 20! People in Brazil, Japan, South Africa, they're all talking about him. About you, Patricia, ever the strategist, leaned over the pile of documents. "We have them cornered. Public opinion is on our side. The lawsuits will follow. Congress is already calling. They can't hide anymore." Michael leaned back, the weight of the moment settling in. He thought of Samuel, of the brass key, of Dorothy's trembling hands as she handed him the box of history. What had been buried for over a century was now alive, breathing, igniting the world. Juanita entered quietly, holding a printout. She placed it in front of him. It was a headline from the New York Times. Michael Jordan, more than a champion, a descendant restoring justice. For a moment, Michael's throat tightened. He had been called many things: athlete, icon, legend. But this was different. This was legacy. And yet, as he looked at the headlines, the hashtags, the storm of voices rising in support, he knew the fight wasn't over. Because the clubs, the system, the fortress, they would not go down quietly. Oakley seemed to read his mind. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "They're coming, Mike. You just embarrassed the most powerful people in the country. They won't take it lying down." Michael nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Then let them come. We've been playing their game long enough. Now, it's time they play ours." And as the night stretched into dawn, Michael understood something, with piercing clarity. This was no longer just his battle. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And together, their voices were louder than any closed door. But the clubs weren't about to go down quietly. They struck back with a $50 million attack. The explosion of Michael's press conference hadn't even cooled when the counterattack began. By sunrise, polished statements appeared on the websites of country clubs across America. They were filled with lofty words: tradition, integrity, misunderstanding. But beneath the rhetoric was a clear message. They weren't surrendering. By the end of the week, the counterpunch landed. A lawsuit, filed in federal court. The plaintiffs, an alliance of country clubs united under a hastily formed Association for Private Tradition. The demand? $50 million in damages against Michael Jordan for defamation, malicious misrepresentation, and undue harm to private organizations. Oakley crumpled the newspaper and tossed it across the room. "Man, they've lost their damn minds. They embarrass you, erase your family's history, and now you're the criminal?" Patricia read the legal complaint carefully, her brows furrowing. "They're not stupid. This isn't about winning the case. It's about burying him under pressure. A lawsuit this size is designed to intimidate, to drain resources, to shift the narrative. They'll say he's attacking tradition, that he's greedy, that he's stirring division. It's a PR war disguised as a legal one." Michael sat quietly, his fingers steepled under his chin. Let them throw their punches. All it does is show the world how scared they are. But the lawsuit wasn't the only weapon. Almost overnight, hit pieces began to flood the media. Anonymous sources claimed Michael had fabricated Samuel Morrison's history, Tabloids suggested the documents were forged. Old controversies from Michael's career, gambling rumors, personal disputes, were suddenly dragged back into the spotlight, twisted to paint him as reckless, untrustworthy, unworthy of respect. On social media, bots and trolls multiplied, spewing hashtags like Jordan Fraud and Tradition Matters. It was a coordinated smear campaign designed to muddy the waters just enough that the truth became harder to see. Even allies felt the sting. Oprah received threatening letters warning her to back out. Robert Johnson's businesses suddenly faced surprise audits. Margaret Chen, the insider, found her name leaked online, her inbox flooded with threats and slurs. She called Patricia one evening, her voice trembling. "I knew it would be bad, but not like this. They've frozen my bank accounts. They've canceled contracts I've had for years. They're trying to erase me the way they erased Samuel," Patricia reassured her. But when she hung up, her face was grave. "They're playing dirty, Michael. They've done this before. They know how to destroy people quietly." Michael stared out the window into the Chicago night. "Then we don't stay quiet." Days later, Michael was served with the lawsuit, in person. A man in a suit knocked on his door, handed him the thick stack of papers, and walked away without a word. Michael flipped through the complaint, his face unreadable. The accusations were outrageous, but the signatures at the bottom were real. Some of the most powerful lawyers in the country now had their sights set on him. That night, he gathered his team. Oakley stormed around the room like a caged bull. "We hit back harder. Go to the press. Tell them it's all lies. Expose every one of those board members. Make them regret they ever came for you." Patricia shook her head. "No, that's what they want. An emotional reaction they can spin against us. The smarter move is to stay steady. Let the evidence speak louder than their noise." David Stern joined the call from New York. His voice was low, deliberate. "Michael, I've dealt with power players like this my whole career. They think intimidation is victory, but they don't understand what you represent. If you stay calm, if you stay focused, the public will see the difference between tradition and truth. And truth always wins if you don't blink." Michael listened, nodding slowly. "Then we don't blink." Still, the pressure was immense. Every headline screamed his name. Every news segment debated his motives. Was he a hero or a troublemaker? A reformer or a divider? Even some fans who adored him on the court hesitated when politics entered the game. Juanita, ever steady, placed her hand on his one evening. "Michael, remember what your father said. Don't waste your time pounding on locked doors. Build your own. Maybe this isn't just about tearing them down. Maybe it's about building something they can't touch." Her words stayed with him. In the midst of lawsuits and smear campaigns, an idea began to form in Michael's mind. Not just resistance, creation. Not just exposing corruption, replacing it with something better. But before he could act, another twist shook the ground beneath him. Late one night, Oakley burst into his study, holding a cassette tape. His face was wild with disbelief. "Mike, you need to hear this." The tape crackled as Oakley pressed play. A familiar voice filled the room. The voice of Richard Hartwell, a powerful board member at one of the largest clubs. The words were chilling. "We can't let him win. If Jordan gets in, they all get in. And if they all get in, we lose everything. So whatever it takes, lawsuits, lies, smear campaigns, we bury him. We bury his family history with him." Michael froze. The words cut like a blade. They weren't just resisting him, they were openly conspiring to destroy him. And now he had proof. Oakley's fists clenched. "Tell me we're gonna burn them with this, Mike. Tell me." Michael stared at the tape, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "Not yet. Timing, Oak. Timing. We don't just burn them. We light the whole sky." He set the tape down beside the rejection letters, Margaret's documents, and Samuel Morrison's petitions. The pile was no longer just evidence. It was dynamite, waiting for the right spark. And in that moment, Michael knew exactly what his next move would be. With the world watching, Jordan made his boldest move yet. The storm was at its peak. Lawsuits flying, smear campaigns spreading, threats multiplying. But Michael Jordan had never been the kind of man to stay on defense for long. On the court, when the game tightened, he didn't retreat. He attacked. And now, faced with an entrenched system determined to bury him, he chose not just to resist, but to create. The idea had been brewing since Juanita's words echoed through their home. Don't waste time pounding on locked doors. Build your own. Samuel Morrison had once built land with his bare hands. That land had been stolen, erased, turned into playgrounds for the powerful. But what if Michael reclaimed that spirit? What if he built something new, something undeniable, something the world could point to and say, "This is what belonging looks like"? The decision crystallized one evening as Michael stared at the pile of evidence on his desk. The rejection letters, Margaret Chen's memos, Hartwell's incriminating tape. The documents proved the corruption. But proof wasn't enough. Proof destroyed. Creation inspired. The next morning, Michael gathered Patricia, Oakley, Stern, and his closest advisors. His tone was calm, but his eyes burned. We're done playing their game. From this moment, we build our own. Patricia leaned forward. What do you mean? Michael spread a map across the table. It showed a stretch of land just outside Chicago. This was Morrison land once. It was seized a century ago, swallowed into the system. I've bought it back. And on this land, we're building a golf course, not just any course, the Morrison Golf Club, open to everyone. No locked gates, no hidden ballots, no erased names. Oakley's eyes widened. Mike, you're not just fighting them anymore. You're replacing them. Michael nodded. Exactly. They can slam their doors. We'll open ours wider. They can erase history. We'll restore it. They can cling to the past. We'll build the future. Your plan was audacious. A golf club of his own, named for the ancestor they tried to erase, on the very ground stolen from him. It was more than symbolic. It was revolutionary. News of the project broke weeks later in a press conference that stunned the nation. Michael stood before reporters once again, this time not with rejection letters, but with architectural blueprints and artist renderings. Behind him, a banner read, Morrison Golf Club, a new tradition. He spoke slowly, deliberately. For too long, golf has been a game guarded by gates. But golf was never meant to be exclusive. It was meant to challenge, to unite, to inspire. My great-great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, built land with his own hands. Land that was taken from him and turned into places he was never allowed to enter. Today, I reclaim that land. Today, I honor his legacy. Today, we build a club that belongs to everyone. The announcement rippled across the world. Some called it brilliant. Others called it impossible. But one thing was certain. It changed the conversation. No longer was Michael simply reacting to exclusion. He was redefining inclusion. Construction began almost immediately. Bulldozers cleared ground. Architects designed fairways that curved with elegance. A clubhouse was planned with wide open halls, walls dedicated not to portraits of wealthy members, but to murals of history. Samuel Morrison, civil rights pioneers, athletes who broke barriers, celebrities, activists, and everyday people flocked to support. Donations poured in. Golf legends like Tiger Woods publicly endorsed the project. This isn't just about golf, Tiger said at a televised fundraiser. This is about the soul of the game, about who gets to hold the club, walk the course, and claim their place in history. Meanwhile, the old guard fumed. Articles derided Michael's project as a vanity experiment. Anonymous board members sneered in interviews, calling it a stunt. But the public was captivated. For every insult hurled, 10 new supporters rose. Margaret Chen, once exiled and threatened, found new purpose as part of the project's leadership. She stood beside Michael at events, her voice steady. I know what the inside looks like. I've seen the rot. This, what we're building here, is what fairness looks like. Oakley, too, found joy in the project. He walked the cleared land, with Michael one afternoon, watching as the first holes began to take shape. "You know," he said, grinning, "you're really doing it. You're not just proving them wrong. You're making them irrelevant." Michael smiled faintly, surveying the land. "That's the point. If they won't open the game, we will. And when we do, no one will even care about their gates anymore." The Morrison Golf Club became more than construction. It became a movement. Families who had never stepped on a golf course visited the site, taking photos, sharing stories. Young kids watched, wide-eyed, as Michael explained what it meant to reclaim history. And slowly, the narrative shifted. The smear campaigns lost traction. The lawsuits dragged on, but public opinion drowned them out. For every attack, there was a headline about Morrison Golf Club rising from the soil. For every insult, there was an image of children swinging clubs on land their ancestors had been denied. Months later, as the final sod was laid and the clubhouse doors prepared to open, Michael stood on the first tee. The course stretched out before him, green and alive, the wind carrying the scent of fresh earth. Juanita stood beside him, their children at her side. Oakley clapped him on the back, grinning. Patricia wiped her eyes. Margaret held her head high. Michael placed a ball on the tee, stepped back, and lifted his club. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, he swung. The ball soared into the sky, cutting through the air with grace, landing softly on the fairway of the club that bore his ancestor's name. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed, and Michael, lowering his club, whispered to himself, "This one's for you, Samuel." But this wasn't just a golf course. It was a message to the world. The opening day of Morrison Golf Club wasn't just an event. It was a statement. People from every walk of life gathered on the freshly cut greens, children clutching tiny clubs, elders carrying memories of exclusion, celebrities standing shoulder to shoulder with everyday families. It didn't look like any golf event in history. It looked like the future. Michael walked slowly across the clubhouse lobby, his eyes scanning the walls. Instead of oil paintings of wealthy founders, the walls were alive with murals. Samuel Morrison clearing land under a burning sun. Women who had been denied entry to clubs finally swinging freely. Civil rights leaders who had marched for inclusion. It wasn't decoration. It was testimony. Reporters swarmed him with questions. "Mr. Jordan, how do you respond to those who say this is political? What message are you sending to traditional clubs?" Michael answered simply, "This isn't political. This is human. Samuel Morrison's story is one of millions. We're not tearing anything down. We're building something new, something that belongs to everyone." That day, kids who had never seen a golf course before took their first swings. Families walked fairways that had once been closed to them. And for the first time in decades, golf didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a field open to all. The ripples spread quickly. Other athletes, inspired by Michael's move, began launching similar initiatives. In Atlanta, a community-funded tennis center opened. In Los Angeles, a theater restored by entertainers became a haven for underrepresented artists. Across the country, forgotten names and erased histories began resurfacing, families digging into archives, reclaiming what was stolen. And through it all, Michael stood not just as a champion of basketball, but as a steward of legacy. His career had been defined by victories measured in points and rings. But now, his true legacy was measured in doors opened and voices restored. One evening, after the grand opening festivities had quieted, Michael returned to the course alone. He walked to the 15th hole, where a plaque had been placed at the edge of the fairway. It read, "To Samuel Morrison, whose hands built what others tried to erase. We remember, we honor, we continue." Michael placed his hand on the plaque, his chest tight with emotion. He could almost hear his father's voice again. "Don't pound on closed doors. Build your own." For the first time, he realized what that truly meant. Not just survival, not just success, creation, renewal. legacy. As he stood there, Oakley joined him, resting a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Mike. They tried to erase you, erase him, erase all of us. But now, they can't ignore it anymore." Michael smiled faintly. This wasn't just me. It was everyone who refused to stay silent. Margaret, Patricia, Stern, you, Samuel. Every person who ever heard, "You don't belong," and kept walking anyway. They stood in silence, the wind carrying the sound of children's laughter from the clubhouse. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was history rewritten, destiny reclaimed. Months later, the lawsuits collapsed. Public opinion had shifted too far. The smear campaigns lost power against the living, breathing proof of Morrison Golf Club. And in the years that followed, more inclusive clubs rose, some bearing the names of ancestors once erased, others simply carrying the spirit of open doors. Michael's name would forever be etched in basketball history. But now, it carried something more. His legacy was no longer just about how high he soared or how many trophies he lifted. It was about how deeply he honored those who came before him and how widely he opened doors for those who would come after. Because, in the end, greatness isn't only about victory. It's about legacy. And Michael Jordan's legacy was this. He turned humiliation into resolve, exclusion into creation, erasure into remembrance. He built a door that could never again be closed. Because Michael Jordan never lost the fights that really mattered. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that history is more than the trophies we win, but the voices we restore, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who believes in breaking barriers. And let's keep these stories alive. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we reclaim them.